Hi, Dawn. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here.
I'm so excited that you're here. I provided a brief bio of your extensive background and experiences in working with the older adult population, specifically related to aging in place. That's how
Yes.
we crossed paths, and I'm so glad I met you. Can you tell us more about your experiences and how they led you to start your own home modifications practice?
Yeah, it has been a little bit of a bumpy ride. It was not a very clear path on how I got here. In fact, a lot of the times I never thought I would ever be owning my own business and, working for myself. So I actually kind of grew up a caregiver. Both of my parents had a lot of health issues when I was younger, and it was that weird stage of being like a child, but also taking on caregiver roles, managing medications, sometimes checking in and things like that. So long story for that one. But what it did was it led me to occupational therapy. I kind of started as a teacher, realized I didn't want to do that. I wanted to do more one on one. And my heart has always just been older adults, more than likely, because of my experience with my family. So I taught for about 3 years before going back to school. Then I became an acute care therapist, thinking that I just wanted to see people, get them where they needed to go and be done with it, go home, stop thinking about it. And there was just something really missing. And I was getting really burnt out because I just wasn't in aligned with what I actually want to do, which is to like make a real difference in people's lives. So when COVID hit, I know a lot of entrepreneurs sort of have that similar story. Couldn't find a job anywhere. Things were kind of crazy. So that led me to Aurora Independence. And now what I focus on is home accessibility and home safety consulting. It's actually been kind of perfect because it joined together my teaching experience, my art experience, my design, and a little bit of that background that I had from my art career now to work on home modifications and home safety, which is just one of the many pieces of aging in place, but it is where my current niche is. So that's what led me to Aurora Independence. And here I am. I never thought I'd be here.
I love hearing how people pull from all the different experiences in their lives and like bring
Right.
them together to then ultimately end up where you are, right? And I think that's the beauty of everyone's professional careers.
It's so true. Like you feel lost for a minute and then you get to your spot and you're like, oh wait, all of that made sense. Like I pulled
Right.
all my skills and filled my bag and here I am.
Right. That's what I live by. Everything happens for a reason. Like there's a reason why you go down a certain path, why you
Yes.
have certain experiences. They all lead you to where you ultimately will end up,
Yeah.
right?
And need to be or want to be. So I agree
Yeah.
fully.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Before we break down our topic for today, I want to talk about myths. What are some
Yes.
common misconceptions people have about home modifications and or aging in place?
I think there's three that I hear the most. And so the first one is that like it's only for old people. We don't need to focus on aging in place because it's only for old people. What does old mean anyway? But what I have found is that even per AARP, 9 out of 10 people actually want to age in place, but only about 15% of them have started to think about it. And honestly, only 1% of the homes in the United States, like this is a macro view, are actually accessible for even a little bit, right? Like grab bars. And only five are mobility friendly. So the homes that we have here in the United States are not ready for the majority of people who actually want to age in them. So, the common myth is that it's only for old people, but the reality is we break ankles, we sprain ankles, and none of our homes are ready for even that small little mobility challenge, especially those in the city where we have multi stories. I think one of the other myths I hear a lot is that it's way too expensive. And the reality is that retrofitting homes can be expensive if it's not planned properly, if it's not done in stages, or if you went to a professional who kind of like pushed you through things you weren't expecting. But when we're building homes, it is not more expensive to add in any of those accessibility features. So, when people focus on building houses that are universally designed, it's like a difference of a couple $1,000s over the entire thing. I do hear retrofitting can be a little bit more, but it's not that it's too expensive. It tends to be that it hit at the wrong time for that person's expenses, if that makes sense. And I would say one of the last ones that I hear is that caregiver services in the home are somehow inferior. People think that caregivers are out there just to make it for the money. And the reality is that's not true. What I find in my personal experience is that a lot of the caregivers that are working in homes, they are scrappier, they are more well trained, they have received more CEUs because they're kind of in that field alone. So they have to know a lot more than somebody who has an entire institution behind them. And I think you and I can agree, healthcare workers are not rich. We are not doing it for the money. Majority of us are there to do it because we care about humans. We're very empathetic and we want to make a big difference. So those are the three big myths that I hear: that it's only for old people, it's way too expensive, or that people are somehow inferior when you get home care. And I don't agree with any of them.
I also agree with you that I don't agree with any of those. I mean, one of the things I always point out is if it's not, it might not be for you, but do you want your elderly grandma to visit, or elder relative to visit, or
Right.
your friend whose kid has a disability? You want them to come over, right? Like, just thinking about
Yes.
how it would impact maybe your social life too, right? Especially if you're someone who likes to host, right?
Yes.
So having to
Yes.
think about all of that. And then I love that you, compared like when you're building a new home versus retrofitting. I think
Mhm.
there's a lot of misinformation around that, specifically too. As more and more homes get built,
Yep.
I feel like we really need to ensure that people understand the importance of a 30-year vision or a
Yes.
40-year vision, right? Are you planning to die in this home? Right? It is like
Yes,
such a brutal question, but it's like,
it is. And it
if
makes
you
people
are,
uncomfortable. Mhm.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is uncomfortable, but you know what's more uncomfortable? You getting there to age 70 or 80, and now you can't navigate your own home anymore.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
then
And
you're
that's
uncomfortable all the time.
Yes, and that's the type of humans that are contacting me now. Those are the individuals that
Right.
are like, I should have done this sooner. And it's like, oh, hindsight is 2020, and you're absolutely right. And I just wanted to come back to your point about visitability. That's what we call when it's like, do you want to have your grandparents come in? And I know even in my own house, my husband and I, we have a 3-story house. We stopped hosting anything because we have a couple aunts and uncles that have mobility issues, and they can't get into my house. I can't even get in my house if I broke an ankle. Like, it would be
Mhm.
impossible. And so I agree with you. I mean, the visibility piece of it and the planning and that 30-year vision, I love that. It's against human nature a little bit, but it's something that I really think and I really hope that our communities can work towards.
Yeah, absolutely. I do find that most people who are building homes today are generally building them forever, right?
Yes.
Like that is their
Yes.
forever home.
Yep.
You're not going to build your starter home from
Yes. No,
scratch.
not anymore. We don't have the land for it.
We don't have the money for it.
No, it's true. Very, very true.
Our generations do not have the
No.
money for that. But so if generally, really getting that point across of like,
Yeah.
do it now so you don't have to do it later, right?
Yeah. And it
You'll
can,
save yourself money because labor
yes.
costs go up. We've seen how inflation has risen, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
it's going to be a lot more expensive in 30 years to retrofit everything than it would have been if you do it today.
Exactly. And I mean, it's simple stuff. It's like just put in lever style handles when you're designing your doors, or raise up your your electrical sockets and bring down your light switches by like 6 inches. But that 6 inches can make a huge deal when you're 75, gravity is hit, and you are no longer your 6 foot self. You know what I mean? It's just simple
Mhm.
things like that. So I'm with you. Totally
Yeah.
agree.
Or even just like tubs and showers, right? Like
Yes.
figure out a way to have both if you really want both, but make sure you have a walk-in shower available.
Yes. And zero entry if you can afford it. Because I
Hmm.
mean, from beginning and building, it's actually really simple to make those, but the retrofitting can be a little bit more expensive because you have to work around the house's structure. So I'm with you.
Yeah. Yeah. When you talk about homes, I mean, ours is similar. My grandpa with his walker had come over to see our
Yeah.
new house, and like he had a really hard time because we have stairs up the front and the back, right? We have
Yep.
raised homes in the city because we have basements. And
Yep.
so they have stairs on both sides of it.
Yeah.
And, we actually bought this home with the intention of like being able to provide support for our parents if they ever need it.
Mhm.
But that was more of like a long-term vision where we kind of were like, okay, what modifications can we make in the future if we need to? But we
Right.
didn't think of it in the now. Because like right now, nobody really needed it. But we didn't
Yep.
think about like my grandparents who are still around because they don't visit
Yes.
very often, right? And so um it's just interesting. Like, it's not just about you. It's
It's
about
not.
a lot more than that.
Well, and even at like my life stage, I don't know that I have a single friend who doesn't have kids or is thinking about them or something like that. And so it comes to a point that even like the friends with the baby who's sleeping in the car that they put into the stroller that they don't want to take out, if I just had like a simple walk in, they could just like roll the stroller in. Instead, they have to lift and carry. And I watch my two neighbors, they've got two kids, they're fully physically functional adults, but I see them struggling getting in and out of their doors with even their child's things or their children's things. And so aging in place really isn't just for old people, it's for everybody at every stage. It just kind of means that we're trying to age comfortably within our own homes that we've made, and that's any age.
Yeah. I think you just answered the next question, but for our audience, what is aging in place? I feel like it is such a jargon word within our industry, and I'm not sure that people outside of our industry truly understand what the phrase age in place means. I think some people can
Mhm.
context clue it and figure out like this is probably what it means, but what is
Yeah.
the true, like in your eyes and your definition of like aging in place? What does it mean, and
Yes.
why is it becoming increasingly important, especially for older adults?
Yeah. So I think aging in place, and I completely agree with you that there's a lot of jargon in it, and the common person or the more individual like out in the community might not recognize it. And I think part of that is because the definition changes depending on which industry you're in. So, the construction industry has their definition and all that. So essentially the CDC kind of just finds it as the ability for one to live within their own home and community safely, independently, comfortably, regardless of age, income, or ability level. So that's like the official government definition that kind of brings us aging in place. For me personally, I think it's really about having the safety and security and comfortability of living within your own space. And when I say your own space, I think a lot of people think it has to do with homes or houses. And I really think of it about your home, your space, your apartment, your assisted living facility, wherever it is that you have chosen to stay in that moment. I think it's really important because it's wild numbers, and maybe people have heard it, maybe they haven't, but by 2030, all baby boomers are going to be over the age of 65. So there will not be a single baby boomer, however wide you think that range is, that will be under 65. So that means retirement age. That means going on to Medicare. That means trying to use the services that they have worked really, really hard their whole life and have every right to access. So by 2030, to put that into a different number, 1 in 5 people are actually going to be over the age of 65. So you can have 5 people in a room, and probably one of them is going to be retirement age. But that gets even greater. So as we get to like 2054, we're supposed to have 84 million people here in just the United States that are over 65. And so it's really important for us to start thinking about aging in place. We probably should have been doing it 15 years ago, but it's like imperative that we start it now, because in 6 years, we have a large swath of people that are going to be over 65. So I think right now it's like maybe 14% of the population. And by 2054, it's supposed to be up to 23 to 24% of the population will be of retirement age. And that's not to say that they're out of the game, but it is to say that there is different needs once we hit that stage, and we have to start thinking about it. So aging in place, like we said, is kind of that idea of living and growing within your community, in your home, in your space. And it's really important because our population is growing. It's getting bigger, it's getting older, and it's shifting. So
Yeah, I love the numbers that you threw out, because here's one for you. And I try to
yeah.
bring this one home a lot. When the first baby boomer was born, the life expectancy was 65.
Yes.
Most baby boomers today are living well into their 80s.
Yep.
So a lot of them didn't see the need to plan for living older than 65, right?
Yes.
So they're like, "Oh, we'll work until we're 65. Maybe we'll live a little longer, and then that's it," right?
Yep.
They didn't think about how getting older than 65 and living well into your 80s and 90s and even hundreds, how
Yes.
those last 30 to 40 years of your life will be impacted
Yep.
based on where you're living, what you're doing, what your social life is. Like, if you're no longer working, you now have all this time to do other stuff and think about other stuff. It's essentially a second life,
It
right?
is. It
Which people
is.
didn't have before.
Yep.
But
And
that's also why, sorry,
no, please go on, because
I
I'm going to
said,
just agree with you.
yeah, but I'm saying, but that's also why the population is going to increase so much with
Yes.
older adults, is because they're living longer, which is
Yes.
amazing, right? It's fantastic, but we need the services and resources to be able to provide for them and support them. And like you said, that needed to start 10 years ago.
At
We are
least, at
very late
least.
to the game. I mean, there's
Yeah.
this huge uprising of the care economy and,
Yes.
health tech and services that are now developing and, getting a lot of attention. But this stuff, we needed it 10 years ago,
I know.
not today. I mean, better late than never. But like right now, we're trying to fix and solve problems as they're happening. We should have had systems in place 10 years ago. And I just don't want the next generation to feel the same way in another 30, 40 years,
Yeah. And you know what? And I think that's a really good point, because a lot of the retirees that I'm seeing now, they are so excited about what they're going to do next. Because now they're like, oh, I get to do what I actually wanted to do when I grew up, because we did the things we were supposed to do. And now I'm still young. I'm still fit. I still want to do all these things. And so that almost creates this like mental block, because they don't want to think about aging in place anymore, because I don't want to admit anything's going to happen to me. I'm still good. I mean, I think of my neighbor who just retired. He's 70. I mean, this man could kick my butt in a soccer game any day. He could probably like lift me. And I'm like, you're so much stronger than I am. For me to talk to him about like nutrition and aging and how his eyes may change. And I tried to have and it's just not, it's not something he's thinking of, and he shouldn't have to, and he doesn't almost need to, but we do, because he does live in the same type of house as me. There is going to be a thing. He is 70. And even though he's in such good shape, we do have to think, and there's a mindset shift that is occurring, this excitement of retirement, but also this mental block of, I don't want to think about what comes after retirement,
Yeah, I find that the hardest part is really trying to convince people that they need to think about it, even if they don't feel like they do, right?
Right.
It's one of those things where it's like, yeah, I know we don't want to think about it either, but like you should, because at any given moment, you are one accident away from needing support, right?
Literally.
All of us, like a bike accident, a car accident, or a fall, like you can be as fit as a fiddle, right? But like,
if your ankle rolls, and you have a bad sprain, you're non-weight bearing for a week. That's a terrible week. Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Exactly. And then what do you do when you live in homes like yours and mine? Right.
Exactly. Which I think a lot of people live in. I mean, a good portion of our population lives in cities, and those rural homes, even if they're like double wides, they're still raised up. So there's still 5 or 6 steps to get into them. And that can be a huge challenge. And so sure, it's a flat house and everything's on the same level, but how do you get in and out of it?
Yeah.
You can't get to your doctors. If your friends can't visit, you're facing social isolation and depression, and it's just hard.
Yeah, it becomes a domino effect, right? Especially in these older cities that didn't get the uplift, facelifts, right? Like Philly, definitely.
Yep.
And then Chicago, there's certain neighborhoods that never got a facelift, right? That are still in those really old homes that are very inaccessible.
Yes.
And they also, unfortunately, happen to be in areas where services are minimal, right?
Yes, correct.
Resources are low. And so it's really important that they're also someone's getting out to them to educate them and really relate the importance of like, hey, we need to think about what's going to happen when you start needing help, because it's not an if, it's a when.
It's a when. Yeah.
That's another like statistic that keeps coming across my feeds, is that like 80% of individuals over the age of 65 will need some sort of support in their lifetime, in the remaining lifetime that they have, right?
Yep.
So that's 80% of that 14 million population or whatever that is, right? That
84
is
million
going to need support. 84 million. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
That's
wild. And I forget what the other statistic is. I should have brought it in and wrote it down, but it's something about like 1 in 5 people are going to acquire a disability. So maybe they weren't born with one, but they will acquire some type of disability. And I mean, that could be as simple as like glasses and vision issues, but it might be as complex as like a spinal cord injury because you got injured at a work job. You know what I mean? So
Mm-hmm.
it's wild to think that that many individuals are going to acquire a disability. And we don't want to be any of those people, but because somehow disability is bad, it's not, but people think it is. And so, it's just something they want to avoid. It's a
Yeah.
shame.
As an occupational therapy practitioner and an aging in place specialist, what are some of the most common challenges that you see older adults facing when they decide to stay in their homes as they get older?
Yeah, I think this is such a great question. There's definitely a few of them. And the one that I like to start with is low health literacy. Um, I'm a highly educated individual. I bill insurance. I understand some of the policies. I understand why things happen. I still struggle with how to navigate some people's insurance policies when I'm trying to help them out. And so a lot of people, as they get older, they lose concept of what their benefits are. Medicare has changes. There's a bunch of different types of plans, things like that. So I think health literacy and what their benefits are and what they're entitled to is something that I see a lot of clients missing. And it's one of those challenges because they don't even know to advocate for themselves because they didn't know it was a thing that they were allowed to have. The other thing is support. I see a lot of families struggling with this because while there is a strong family bond, geographically, the United States is extremely large. So they're just not close enough to provide the actual day-to-day, check-ins or physical support. Sometimes it's that somebody outlived most of their family. And so they're just the last one there. Who are they calling? Especially those individuals who are living to be 100. I have several of them as clients. And it's just fascinating because they don't know who to call because their family supports have unfortunately passed away, or they have distance of those nieces and nephews and grandnieces and nephews and grandchildren and things like that. I think the other one is lack of community and that social isolation that comes with getting older. And we already touched on it a little bit. Sometimes that social isolation, why is that word so hard to say, comes from an inability to get in and out of the house. Maybe it's that their friends can't get in and out of their house, or maybe it's that we can't get in and out of our house. But either way, there's a limit or a struggle of coming and having that access. Sometimes that long-term social isolation can turn into cognitive deficits. So it can increase your risk for dementia by 64% by being socially isolated, which is just wild to think about because so many older adults, even during COVID, they were alone. They weren't allowed to access their family or friends because of all the regulations, which were needed, but also had a side effect that we have to really come to terms with. And I think the last one for me is transportation. Cities and rural areas both have transportation issues. I have been advocating at a state level because Pennsylvania has a master aging plan. And one of the things that we've been working on, or people have been advocating for, because I don't have a hand in it specifically, but the things that we have been advocating for is transportation. Because in rural areas, there is no transportation, but in urban areas, it's not accessible. So it might as well not exist. And so in the end, how do you get to your doctors if you've lost the ability to drive, or if you're the smart person who decided you no longer want to drive? Well, now what do? Your social isolation comes up. You know what I mean? It's like we talked about, it's a snowball effect. And so I think that transportation with aging in place is also a big thing. Sometimes caregivers don't have the transportation to get to their people. I see that in home care companies where they have a lot of caregivers that depend on public transportation. So they will only provide almost 30 hours a week. If it's any less than that, they can't take you on as a client because they have to make it worth it for their caregiver to go to that person. Long gone are the days where somebody would just do 2 hours here, drive to the next person an hour, drive to the next person. Gas prices have gone up, inflation has gone up. And so that transportation piece leaves a lot of individuals without the level of care that they want, need, or are looking for. So those are kind of the things: lack of community, lack of support, low health literacy, and transportation. Those are some of the largest challenges I'm currently seeing in my practice.
I really want to, it's a bit of a caveat, but I really want to highlight that statistic that you said about social isolation leading to dementia.
Yes.
What was it?
So I have read before that it can increase your risk for dementia by 64%.
Right. And that's the part that I think people don't realize.
Yes.
I think there was a lot of research that came out about the toll of the pandemic on young adults and children. and even adults in the workforce, but not as much as young adults and children.
Right.
I would love to see what that research looks like for the older adult population.
And I don't know if anyone's doing it. Like, have you? Maybe they are.
No.
If a listener knows, leave a comment, please.
Yeah, I haven't seen it. I mean, we already know that it's really hard or difficult to differentiate between depression, dementia, and older adults, right?
Yes,
so I think there's a lack of data when it comes to that.
Yep.
And then we know that the older generation doesn't like to speak about mental health. And so I think there's lack of information on that end too, as far as trying to understand the true impact of that, right? Yeah. But we do know is that depression rates among older adults have gone up, anxiety has gone up,
suicide,
and dementia has gone up, suicide has gone up, right? And so we can infer based on the fact that all these rates have only escalated since the pandemic, that a big part of that can likely be due to the social isolation that was faced, right? I mean, I didn't see my parents for a year and a half. Year and a half, right?
It's a long time.
It's a long time to not see your parents that you are normally used to seeing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
And I think it's really important that families understand that social isolation is a big factor. And
it's huge.
Related to that, you mentioned the geographic discrepancy. So this is something I've brought up before with like friends and families and things like that. But families used to never move away from each other. They used to live in the same neighborhoods, grow up together. The communities grew up together, right? Like you would grow up in a neighborhood and you would see your neighborhood friends that were like, you were 5 years old riding your bikes and, coming down when the lights went out, right? Things like that. And then getting married and having kids, like the whole community just grew up together. It was generational community living, right?
Yep.
And that doesn't exist anymore as much. I'm sure it does in certain places, but it doesn't in a lot of places. It doesn't anymore. And so now you lose that community aspect of where even the neighbors can't look out for each other because they don't know each other.
Right.
Right.
Like, I mean, I feel it even, you know what I mean? Like a lot of my friends have left. And so who's here in Philly with me? I still have really good friends, but they don't live here,
Right.
So I hear you.
Right. Like my 3 best friends live in 3 different states from me. Right. And then like, even for like, I live 1,000 miles away from my parents. Right.
Yeah.
And my friends also live thousands of miles away from their parents. And so it becomes this like, okay, now everybody's moving for work, for lifestyle, for community, for whatever reason, right? And they're far from the supports that they had.
Yeah.
And it's a big conversation. I mean, like, my parents want to retire to Florida. And I'm like, what are you going to do there?
Yeah, who are you going to hang out with?
Right, exactly. So I think there's these ideas of retirement and like these ideas of this is what we want to do, but there needs to be more thought around, okay, well, what are you going to do there? What's your support system going to look like? Right. And if something happens, my brother and I would have to jump on a plane.
Yeah.
You
can't just be there in just an hour. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Yep. And so I think more people in our generation need to start having these conversations too, as far as how do we limit how many challenges come up in the future, right? We want to prevent as many challenges from arising as possible. Obviously, there's going to be some things that are inevitable that you can't plan for, right? But as many things as you can control, we should start having those discussions earlier.
I agree. And I think a nice thing about this, it's bad, but it's nice, I guess. Everything comes with a positive, negative. But I do find a lot of Gen X, the sandwich generation, the people we've forgotten about, all of that. I have more of them reaching out to me now for some design services because they are understanding that. And I think that it is really good for our younger generations, the elder millennials, the zennials, and all the Gen Z to start seeing how their family is navigating those. I think technology is going to help a lot, but it's not the end all be all. Like AI isn't going to save us from the physical needs to have someone buy our groceries or put it away into our cabinets. It's just not, unless we have fancy robots, which we can go into a sci-fi situation with that. But
I know.
Cool. But yeah, and I do think that there's this very interesting thing happening where the older generations didn't think about it at all they don't want to be a burden, but in some ways, like you're talking about, our geographical differences, it's becoming a burden. And I use that term very, very loosely because I think a lot of people are very happy to care for their loved ones, and it's not a burden. They actually want to help them, but it is a challenge. Let's use that word instead. And then you've got the people who are in the challenge. They're raising their children and they're also raising the older adults. And I think they are starting to this mindset shift. I think they are going to be the ones who push aging in place. And by the time millennials and zennials get there, we're going to have a little bit more resources. At least that's my hope, because I see it, where even some of my clients are, yes, I'm giving the ideas for their mom and dad, but then I'm getting a text a year and a half later. They're like, I actually did that for my bathroom too, because I saw how much it helped mom and dad. And I'm like, I love this. Like, I'm talking myself out of a job and this is lovely.
Yeah. I mean, that's the goal, right? Yeah. I mean, I think anybody who works in healthcare will say, like, our goal in life is to not have a job. Right?
Literally.
Because like that means people are healthy. That means people are
they have their support.
Right. They have their supports. They have their resources. Their homes are accessible. Yes. Like, they've planned everything out and they don't need us. Right.
It's so true. It's so true.
Yeah. Huge caveat on the robots. My husband's a huge like AI tech nerd, and
love it.
We have been watching all the robots coming out of like all these major like robotics companies, right? That are AI infused. And like, I've literally, one of the videos was like literally a robot who was making a meal, like cutting up vegetables, cutting up the apple, and like doing all the meal prep work, right? And then there's another one who's like doing laundry and folding the clothes and putting them away. And I'm like, imagine how helpful this will be to.
It's like the Jetsons. Yeah, like, are we here? But it's also terrifying because then I watch movies like iRobot and I'm like, please, not that.
I think we're a long way from actually this becoming mainstream, but it's just interesting.
It is wild too. I mean, Japan and Singapore, and Thailand even, like, they are light years ahead of us. And as rightfully so, their populations have aged a little bit faster than ours. So they are like ahead of this curve. But it is really fascinating to watch how other countries are handling this and how they are using robots because they don't have the number of caregivers needed. And with those numbers that I provided earlier, I mean, for the first time, we're going to have more people over the age of 65 than we're going to have people like younger. And so there is going to be a caregiver crisis, and it's going to be that we just don't have enough bodies. So robots.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah. It's really interesting.
It is.
So in your typical day-to-day, what are some of the key home safety modifications that you're generally recommending for aging adults? What role does technology play in those home modifications?
Perfect segue.
And then what are some examples of like useful tech tools or devices that you've incorporated?
So there's definitely been a shift even in just like the 4 years that I have been in business. I think when I first started, I was having a lot of people reach out because they had mobility issues. And even the CDC and the World Health Organization have, put out statistics that one of the main drivers of aging in place used to be mobility. So orthopedic issues, back pain, blah, 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 right? And it has now shifted into cognitive, where it is the safety piece, it is the mild cognitive impairment, it is the Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's that are actually starting to come in. So, I mean, when I look at a lot of my clients outside of the grant work that I do, and it's my private pay, a lot of them are coming in with the cognitive safety issues. So a lot of what I'm starting to recommend is like remote monitoring. How do we, again, with that geographic issue, how do we get the families to get the information they need so that they can call on the local supports, especially for those individuals that don't really need 24-hour support. They don't really need 4 hours of support. They kind of need someone to make sure that they took their medication, because if they don't take their medication, things get worse, right? And so I've been starting to recommend a lot of those things. Sometimes it's as simple as like, an app on the iPad that turns it into a clock screen that you can send text messages through, or pictures, or just things to reduce that social isolation piece. So those are some of the things that I'm recommending now in the cognitive piece. When it comes to like mobility and other things, I'm actually still doing really low tech solutions that have a high impact. So it's as simple as like an LED motion sensor light in the right spot. I am so grateful that so many of them have turned into rechargeable now, because when I was originally recommending them even 4 years ago, it was all batteries. And then people didn't have the fine motor and the dexterity to actually open it up to change the batteries. So this light was working for, a month before it would stop working, and they couldn't fix it themselves. And now people are able to, remove it from their magnetic strip, charge it for 30 minutes, put it back, and then there's their light again. So It's been really interesting to see how different diagnoses are requiring different levels of technology. A lot of it's still low tech, very low tech and super affordable. Sometimes it's a little bit higher tech, but semi affordable, but offers a lot more freedom and independence for people. So it's been kind of fascinating.
Yeah, I think a lot of the tech tools, even the high tech ones, are becoming more mainstream in
They
people's
are.
homes, right? Like we all have like either the Google Homes or
Yep.
Amazon Alexa's, Echoes, right? Like all those things already in the house. How can we optimize them to work for that older adult in the house or the
Exactly.
person with a disability who might need some help? And then also with the remote monitoring, most homes now have camera systems, right? Ring
Yep.
camera systems. Set them up inside too, right? It's optimizing what you already have or
Exactly.
optimizing how you can use it in multiple ways so that it doesn't feel like you're making or adding something specifically for that cause, right? And
Right.
I always say like adaptive, not even adaptive, but like a lot of tools are universal.
They
They help
are.
everyone. What's good for
Literally.
one person is good for everybody,
Yep.
usually, right?
Yep. So there's to that point, there's actually smart plugs, right? Smart plugs are great
Mm-hmm.
because you can connect them to your Amazon and Alexa, and we're no longer clap on, clap off. It's just like Alexa, turn the lights on, which is
Yeah.
fancy and cool, and we can show it off to our friends. But those same smart sensors can actually be connected to certain apps that will tell your loved one that, yes, you turned on the coffee pot this morning because they get that notice. They know you woke up. They know you got out of
Mm-hmm.
bed. They know you made it to the kitchen safely. And they
Mm-hmm.
can even use those same smart plugs to like turn off lights. If you notice that, mom did make it upstairs, but she left the lights on and she's got low finances, cool. Someone can remotely turn that light off because they're just checking in to make sure that expenses stay under control. So it's kind of amazing how you're right. Like some of these things that are cool and fancy to show off are actually super functional in another sense that doesn't make a person feel like they're constantly being monitored or they're in like a police state, and every
Right.
part of them is being watched. But key points
Right.
might be.
Right. I mean, yeah, that's the functional is the word I was looking for.
Yes.
It's, if it's functional for one person, it's going to be functional for a lot of people. In most cases,
Absolutely.
everyone.
Yep.
Right. And a lot of these the fancier stuff oftentimes is less functional. Like it's often the
It's
low
over
tech
engineered.
stuff. Right.
Yep.
Right. I always say this to my husband. We bought a home that was previously owned, and a lot of the appliances are very fancy.
Yeah.
They're so non-functional. Like as an OT, I'm constantly like, this is so dysfunctional.
Yep.
I'm like, can we downgrade to like a more functional appliance?
Simple is sometimes better. It really is.
Yeah. And it's crazy to think that because like people always want to upgrade to fancier things. But even at our age, I'm like, this is not functional. Like I want something that works,
Right. And
It's,
like, I'm with you on that. I mean, even some of these technology things that require all these updates and like it has to be plugged in and this and I'm like, I am not computer savvy. Like, am I as fancy as like my husband or maybe your husband in AI stuff? Maybe not. But I know how to like turn a computer on and off when it's not working right. And I know how to reset and I know how to do all that. But some of these apps and some of these things don't integrate well. And
mm-hmm.
then I'm left feeling very frustrated. And I'm like, I can only imagine individuals who don't even have like the computer literacy and whose loved one got them this for Christmas. Like it's not something they're going to use. So I can't tell you the number of times I'm just like, I'm not using that app. I'm not using that program because it is not easily like the user experience is atrocious, even though the power that it has is really amazing and innovative.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if you got a chance to catch the last episode that just went out this week,
I
but
did.
Vic and I talked about the tech tools and how like you want all the tech tools to integrate, right?
Yes.
You want one thing to work for 15 functions and not 15 different things to operate those 15 different functions, because that's what makes it non-functional and difficult. And if it's difficult for us, it's 100 times more difficult for that older adult or for that person with a disability.
Preach. Yep. There it is. Period. Done. Move on.
You mentioned that you have now started seeing like younger generations or maybe like Gen X, our parents' generation being more open and mindful about, addressing these needs earlier on.
Mm-hmm.
How does someone know when it's time to start considering home modifications for aging in place? Obviously the obvious answer is don't wait until something happens, right?
Right.
But how does someone know when it's time? I think we should start thinking about this.
Yeah. I think it's a really good question. And I have like the best answer. And then I have what like realistically is probably going to be what happens if it were a perfect world. So the best answer would be that you would start it from the second you own your first home, right? Because sort of how we know that we're going to upgrade cars and downgrade cars based off of our life experiences. Like families are probably going to have a van or an SUV, but somebody who has no children is probably going to be driving a smaller sedan or something, or you get a truck because you want an adventure vehicle. Just the same way that we sort of plan for those life roles, we should be doing that with our aging in place from the get-go. So in a perfect world, that is exactly what we would say. Realistically, I think that when someone gets a diagnosis that will not be gone in a week. So versus a sprained ankle versus like you get a diagnosis of, for me, rheumatoid arthritis. I mean, I was 14 when I got mine. So at 14, I started thinking about how is this going to impact me? I had to get a little bit more politically active because I knew ACA didn't exist at that point. I wasn't going to have insurance by the time I turned 18. What was I going to do? ACA passed. Great. I could stay on my parents' insurance a little bit longer. And so I think for anybody who has any type of chronic condition, progressive condition, you need to start thinking about it yesterday and you need to be doing it now. And if you don't do that, at least when you start noticing that things that used to be easier kind of require a little bit more effort. So it could be as simple as like, you used to be able to bring that laundry basket up and down the stairs 3 times, but now it kind of is exhausting when you do it once. Start being in tune with yourself so that you can start figuring out when it might be time for an upgrade or a downgrade, just like you would with your cars, just like we would kind of do car maintenance and things like that. You want to do that mental check-in once or twice a year. What can I change? And again, it could be as simple as like, I don't know, twisting that knob is really hard when I'm carrying these things in my hand. So why don't I do a lever handle knob, like a handle, so that I can just kind of use my elbow to open up my doors. So that's sort of the best time to think about it. I would definitely say when you're having trouble, like getting in and out of your shower, when getting on off of the toilet starts to get a little bit more difficult, or if you start having a fear or hesitation of doing something that you know you like, or that you know you want to do, or that you kind of love to do. Anytime you notice that fear or hesitation, it's probably time to start thinking about that upgrade, downgrade. How do we sort of adapt? Because you can still do it. We just might need to change how we do it. So I think that it kind of answers that question. Best case versus reality.
Yeah, I would say best case. I mean, the cheekiest answer is now, right?
At least now, right? Like it's never too late.
Now. I know.
Yeah.
In thinking about these home modifications, I know you touched on this a little earlier with, one of the myths or misconceptions is that it's just too expensive.
Yeah.
What are the financial considerations associated with home modifications for aging in place? And are there any funding options that are available?
So I think that this comes in sort of 2 parts. So are you building a home that's going to be your forever home, or are you retrofitting a home? So when you're building a home, like I said earlier, it actually isn't that much more expensive to add at least universal design considerations. There are 7 different principles. We could do a whole podcast probably on universal design alone, but that's probably not going to be that much more expensive. I will say retrofitting, what I'm finding in my personal practice for the things that people are doing, so grab bars, showers, things like that, it's ranging anywhere from like $3,000 to like $30,000, which is a very large range. And it all depends kind of on the house that you're in. So when it comes to that, funding is really difficult for home modifications. I do know that there are national efforts from the National Council of Aging that are trying to advocate at a political level to get things like tax benefits, tax cuts, things like that when you are actually doing accessible modifications. It hasn't passed. It should. We hope for it, but it might not there. So there are grants that exist for people who have specific conditions. So like the MS Society is amazing. We have spinal cord injury societies that are great that will give out grants that either cover the whole thing or potentially a portion of it. A lot of them are income-based, so there is going to be a large swath of people that make just a little too much, but not enough to do it. And that's sort of the gray area that is always struggling. And that's the part that, political policies or federal policies may help with that. When it comes to insurance, it's spotty. So there are some Medicare Advantage plans that will cover a few of the adaptive modifications that do fall under home modifications. So shower chairs, grab bars, things like that. Medicare traditional really doesn't cover it. They're not covering your ramp. They're not covering even a shower chair. They will cover a commode, but they won't cover the shower chair. It seems silly and arbitrary, but it's just, again, that's where that health literacy is really important, is what does your insurance cover? There are some long-term care insurances that I have gotten, not me personally, but my clients have gotten reimbursed for some of my services. But again, it depends what long-term care policy you covered, what riders you added to it, how long have you had it, and things like that. So funding for home modifications and retrofitting is super spotty, unfortunately. And that is why some people find it to be too expensive, which is why I tend to focus on do your small things. If you're going to be doing an upgrade in your kitchen, right now, think about ways that you could add in some universal design at least so that it could be adapted later, or just, making little Amazon purchases to help you kind of make some tasks a little easier. So retrofitting anywhere from, $0. Usually it's 3,000 or so, 1,500 if you're looking at like a shower mod, or grab bars or, anything like that, but it can go up to like 30 easily.
Yeah, for sure.
It's hard.
It is hard, especially like you said, for those people in the gray area where they don't quite qualify for, Medicaid or federal funding, right? Because Medicaid tends to cover a lot more of those in-home retrofitting
in some
options.
states.
In some states.
And some counties even. It's hard. It's really spotty.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, especially with those gray area families, how can family caregivers determine which modifications are the most urgent or necessary for their loved ones, especially if they're having to cost cut or be financially strategic?
Yeah. So one of the first things I tell families to think about is safety. Is it cognitive safety? Is it physical safety? Is it both? That is one of the first places you want to look. I also think that it is really beneficial to pull in a professional, even though it seems like, why am I spending money for someone to tell me what to do? The right professional can help you mitigate cost. And I say that because I've had a few families that have come to me where they went and did their own bathroom. They did like a one-day install, and it actually made things worse. And so they're calling me about a year later, hey, can you help me figure this out? And it's such a shame because they just spent $15,000 on these 2 one-day installs that in theory would have been great, but the grab bars are in the wrong place, or they put in one of those chairs. So I'm kind of one of those people that I'm like, if you would just spend the money on an occupational therapist to come out and help you out, or at least like a CAPS professional or someone who's trained in home safety, they can help you figure out where to spend your money and how to best use your budget for the most impactful situation. So 1, start thinking about where you need to focus. And 2, I hate to say it, but like getting that professional in sooner. Even a geriatric care manager can really help you out, at least get that started. Again, some of that's covered by insurance, some of it isn't. So it can feel like an unnecessary expense. But I think in the long run, it actually saves money. But it's that 30-year vision, it's that 10-year vision versus that right now immediate concern. So you kind of have to have a little foresight for it.
Yeah. It's that, like, if you're going to do it right. Right.
Right. Because what do they say? Like, measure twice, cut once. It's the same thing when you're planning for aging in place, caregiver services, anything like that. Do your research, hire the people, because then you are more than likely going to have an easier time.
Yeah. Yeah. And in looking for that right person, how does someone find a reputable professional who can help them make those right decisions? And then what should they look for when they're hiring one?
Yeah, I think it's a really great question. So again, I think it depends what discipline you're trying to pull in. I do think there are a lot of certifications that you can look for. So when you're looking at more like the home mods actually doing construction, there are certifications like CHAMP, ECHM, SHSS, CLIP, things like that. Finding someone who has some of those certifications does not mean that they know everything, but at least you know that they have spent a little bit of time learning a little bit more. So that could be a benefit for you. I tend to tell people interview. It is like finding a date. You want to talk to a few people, and if someone gives you a bad feeling, don't use them. If they give you a good feeling, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're the right one. Then you want to start like reading reviews, asking for referrals. So there have been a few contractors that I've tried to connect with, and they're like, I can do this. They talked a big game, but when they sent me pictures of what they did, I was like, nope, you're not it. And so sometimes even having a professional who knows that do a referral for you can be really, really helpful. So who does your doctor know? Who does your social worker or service coordinator? Have they worked with someone in the past? So ask your friends and neighbors. It's not easy to find professionals that are skilled, knowledgeable, and going to be kind and caring. But I think when you ask for referrals, you read reviews, and you ask for previous job photos, you can tell a lot about a person that way. So that's sort of how I tell clients now.
Yeah, I think word of mouth referrals are huge because if someone, especially within professionals, right? Like
Yep.
if you're recommending someone to me, I know it's going to be someone who you've vetted and you've worked with and have liked the outcome, right?
Yes, because so it's my business online too. Like if I mess up.
Right,
yes.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So speaking to that, do you have any firsthand experiences or success stories that you'd like to share?
Oh my goodness. Yes, I do. So I have a few clients one was the family that ended up doing their 1-day install. They were totally flabbergasted because father had MS and he had never really had a fall. He was just worried about it. So they were actually super proactive. They were trying to take care of the bathroom. And when they called me in and I realized that, what this person did really wasn't safe for these individuals because they had a lot of different health issues in the home. They had 3 different individuals using the same bathroom and they all had very different needs. I actually contacted the company and I told them, I said, listen, you did ADA, that's great, but ADA is not for the home. You should have done a personalized recommendation. You did not. Now they're falling. You're putting yourself at risk for a lawsuit at this point because he's fallen 3 times in the last week and he had never fallen before then. So you're going to come out, you're going to fix the shower and you're going to do it for free. And I can pull out my Philly, I will pull it out and I will fight for my clients. And so that was when the family came out.
I love that.
They said they fixed it for free. And I was like, good. And also, if you need me to come in and train your staff, I will. That's where they stopped talking to me. But I was like, it's fine. You fixed my family stuff.
Well, the lawsuit will bring them out real quick.
I know. Yeah. And I think they realized it when they learned. And the guy came out and he's like, well, my mom has MS. So I just gave him what my mom would need. And I was like, and that's your problem because there are different types of MS. It affects different parts of the brain. You're offering services that you are not legally or, educated on providing. So don't do it. And so that's one of my success stories.
Oh boy. That seems like a tough one.
That was my Philly.
Along similar stories.
Yeah.
Do you have any firsthand experience with cultural differences when it comes to receptivity of home modifications or aging in place, and how do you navigate that? Because I know within my own community, it can be a very hard battle sometimes to be like, you need this or you need that, and it's like being an OT, I had my parents install grab bars and I told them how to install them, but I wasn't there when they installed them. And then I went home to visit and they're horizontal. All the grab bars are horizontal. And I'm like, I don't even work in home mods. And I'm like,
I mean, that's good in some places, but no. I do. So I am actually really lucky right now in the sense that my family is super multicultural. So I have my family dynamic and then I also have my professional clients. But I think my family dynamic has really helped. So a lot of my family is either immigrants themselves or first generation immigrant. And in that, I see even within those 3 different families, there's a very different focus on caring for parents. So in some of them, it is multi-generational. Like that grandparent is moving in when they are not doing well, or that grandparent is moving in when the young person has kids and that grandparent is helping to raise that child. And so automatically we've got this multi-generational situation that we have to consider everyone within the family. So that is very interesting. And I have learned a lot. And so, my one family is more Mexican based and I do find that Latinx families, they want to bring the care home. And I found it in the hospital as well. We would be recommending therapy. We would say, really just a week in rehab would make your life so much easier. And they go, nope, we're taking mom home and we're going to provide the care there because they're much more, I don't want to say insular in a bad way, but that is their support system. And so I think it's really important and I love this question because we have to ask those questions. And a lot of us who have never experienced multicultural differences or happen to live in very monochromatic areas, you might not realize that some of the things we find to be empowering, like independence and living alone, is actually really isolating and negative in other communities. I also see it with my sister-in-law right now. I crack up because I'm the OT. I know some things. I told them some things that they should do. They didn't do it right away. They have since done it. And her family is actually from Gujarat as well. And so now there's this piece of, she used to have the family in as multi-generational. They needed some space because she has gotten a little bit more independent in a good way. But that has created a little bit of strife in the family because they feel like she abandoned them, even though she is the one who's closest taking care of the family. And so it's very, very interesting to see how even the immigrant experience can impact home modifications, acceptability of it, family dynamics once they're actually installed. So yes, that's my answer.
That can be
there's a lot there.
Yeah, that's a whole lot to unpack, and that can be a whole session on its own. I do presentations on like within our community on like filial piety and obligations and how that plays a role in caregiving, and this codependent culture where it takes a village is applied to older adults as well, not just children.
Well, and there's even like the machismo, like the man is still the power, and that is still sometimes in some cultures very much where it is. And if the boy says that's what's happening, then that's what's happening, even though it's not the right answer. And that is just something to consider.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Or the firstborn son. That is it's a big thing.
Yeah. Yeah. In our culture, it's a lot of times the firstborn daughter who's taking on the caregiving roles, whether it's older or younger, surprisingly enough. So
and it can be parents and kids even, right? Like siblings, they can take on like the family role there or the motherly role.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Lots to unpack there. Definitely questions that you have to ask though, especially for homes. When I do my care planning, I often ask, I'm like, is your family's involvement important to you? If so, are they aware of that, right? Are they involved? Can they take care of you? Are they aware that you're saying that they can take care of you?
Yes.
Do they have, a lot of times they can, but do they have the capacity to take care of you, like help you out, right? Like maybe they have 3 little kids at home and they work full-time jobs, and maybe they don't have the capacity but want to. So how can you minimize how much help they're giving you and maximize the other resources that are available to you, right? It's really having those tough conversations, and culturally it can be so much to unpack.
And being aware that they know themselves best. And I know one of my other questions that I really like to ask when I come out for an evaluation, because I'll meet people like 2-3 times sometimes, and that's it, because they just need the information and they want to go do it themselves. I'll ask, like, are all the decision makers going to be present at the evaluation? And if the answer is no, am I allowed to talk with the other decision makers? How would you like me to share the information with them? Do you want me to share the information with them? Because that'll tell me a lot about how realistic it is that my recommendations may be taken seriously. If they're not all here and I'm not going to share it with them, I'm like, okay, this tells me a lot.
Right. I do something similar where like if it's a family planning meeting, I'm like, is everybody who needs to be present?
Yes.
Right? Like we need to make sure that everyone's on the same page. We're not going to do any of that he said, she said situations. Nope. My job is to mediate and help you plan the best options possible.
Exactly.
And I need everybody who needs to be involved to be present.
Yes. Because it's so, so important. Because the other piece that I have learned in my life is that there are cultural pieces. And that is larger culture, right? Macro culture. But then there are cultural pieces that come from family dynamics. And sometimes those interweave and sometimes they are in direct conflict with each other. And that is going to very, very much impact how well somebody will implement, or whether or not that plan will actually sit on a shelf with dust, or if it's going to actually get used. So it's just things to consider.
Right. And everyone has different lived experiences within their own family dynamics, right? Yes. What works for one family will actually definitely not work for another family.
Nope.
Right. And so, how do you see the future of aging in place services overall moving towards? What are the challenges and opportunities that kind of lie ahead as we look to the future?
Yeah, I think we touched a few on some of the challenges. So I'll start there and then I'll end on the high note. So I think that some of the challenges are going to continue to be doing it and addressing aging in place in a timely manner with like innovation and also policy creation. This is not something that can be just fixed in each little family. So if it feels hard to age in place, it is because I think a lot of our policies and our federal regulations are in direct conflict or are just not synonymous with what people's goals are. So I think that is going to be the challenge, is just sort of the internal biases that we have about aging and also getting some regulation to be in it. But I do think that there's a lot of opportunities that exist. And I think there's a lot more opportunities than there are challenges if we are looking for them. I think the big one is that there is a lot of buying power for people with disabilities and the older generations that are coming. So all those stats that we talked about in the beginning, that we are going to have that inverse of, people who are 65 and over are going to be more than there are younger people. Well, 65 and older people have had an opportunity to build some of their wealth. They are young. They want to go out. They want to do things. There is a lot of buying power in that demographic that actually can drive innovation. And I think that's why we are seeing things like technology growing and other things like that, because they want the fancy stuff. They want convenience. They want to be able to host. And that is driving this innovation that is eventually going to help them age as well and help us age. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. I really do think that it's a booming industry, basically, because there is going to be improved housing. There's going to be a lot more options for design professionals. I think that it is going to offer a lot of supportive entrepreneurs. I mean, I know more and more people are going into the entrepreneurial spirit and doing caregiving services and things like that. And so it can boost the economy at the same time that we're dealing with something that is extremely difficult, hard to manage, and can be really impactful for families. So yes, there's challenges, but I think in regards to innovation and additional income, I think there's a lot of opportunity here if we are sitting with it. So
I agree with you. I think there's just going to be so much more innovation happening and even improvement in existing services, resources, technologies as more and more people use them.
Yes.
Right. I think that's a big thing too. It's, I've heard since I was very little that I'm not going to have Social Security and that I'm not, we definitely don't have pensions anymore.
Nope.
And like all this stuff. Right. And so it's like, we're already thinking about, okay, how do we build enough wealth to make sure that we can take care of ourselves when we retire, when we get older?
Exactly.
And I think more people will, with that thought process, we're going to create those resources today so that we can use them when we need them. Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah. And I hope that it builds bridges. I think that I find that the younger generations tend to be working together more than they're working apart from each other. And so, yes, there's always this like boomers versus millennials thing. Like we always hear it. Sure, it exists, but I don't feel the same animosity happening. And I really, truly don't think it will. And so I do think that there's going to be this really rough time for us. And I think in the long run, that innovation, that support, I really hope that it builds these bridges between the generations and communities so that we can start to learn how interconnected we actually are and how much better we are when we're actually united versus like trying to just be alone on our own or anything like that. That's my hope.
Yeah. I know we can talk for hours probably and go on into caveats, but for the sake of time, what is one takeaway you'd like the audience to consider as it relates to home safety, modifications, and or aging in place?
Yeah, I'm going to keep it a little large here, I think, and I'm going to focus on the aging in place piece because I really want people to be open to the idea that adjusting your life to age in your home is not a failure. It's actually really empowering when you accept that our lifestyles just change based off of our life roles and they evolve. And it's okay for us to evolve our living situation at the same time, whether it involves modifications, pulling in supports. It's just we're lucky that we're aging. And I really want people to take that away and that it's actually empowering when you know what your solutions are and can be.
Yeah. Absolutely. Dawn, thank you so much for coming on the show and for this wonderful conversation, highlighting the importance of aging in place and starting early and planning ahead and all the fun stuff with that.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And I think it's such an important conversation. And I love that your podcast is opening it up for people to listen to. So thank you.
Thank you.